We're going to go ahead and take a look at how we configure PowerShell to remotely access a Windows VM running in Azure. So I want to do PowerShell-based remote administration to a VM running in Azure. Now, to accomplish this, there's a number of steps we've actually got to perform. We have to, first of all, configure PowerShell remoting and some firewall rules on the VM in Azure. We then have to deploy a certificate for WinRM. Azure only allows remote PowerShell when it's done over SSL, so it's got to be signed by a certificate. It's got to be HTTPS-based remote management. So I've got a little script here that I'm going to run on my VM up in Azure to accomplish a number of these tasks. So we'll take a look at what's in here very quickly. So first, I'm just going to set a variable, which is my computer name. Enable PowerShell remoting. This is actually done by default, but I kind of do it again out of habit whenever I run a script in the event that I do this on a VM that doesn't have it enabled. We then have a firewall rule for inbound WinRM HTTPS, and the port we're using is 5986. That's the default port for SSL-based WinRM. And the little error there, actually, I tested this script earlier, so this firewall rule actually already exists. So that's how you can be verified this actually works properly, because I did test it before I ran this. I just didn't delete the firewall rule. We have a new self-signed certificate. So I'm going to generate a new certificate and store it. And the certificate is named using the DNS name of the server. And then finally, we run some command line utilities. This is the WinRM utility, and we're just configuring it to use HTTPS for my host name and use the certificate that I just generated, and it identifies the certificate by the thumbprint of the certificate. And then we run that command. And so again, that configuration already exists because I ran it previously. So now that that's done, let's go to our VM in Azure, and we need to add an inbound firewall rule for SSL-based WinRM. So add an inbound port. We're going to add WinRM, port 5986, click OK. That rule will appear here in just a second. So there we go, rule is created. And we'll just click out and click in to get a refresh. And so we can see that rule now exists. So now we jump out to our PowerShell script on our host machine. So here I am on the host machine that I'm going to use to remotely connect to that Azure VM. Now, because I used a self-signed certificate, it doesn't actually have full trust. So we've got to do a couple of quick settings. I'm going to call these my session options. So there's a PowerShell commandlet that will allow me to create some options for a PowerShell remoting session. And the two options I'm going to set are skip CA check and skip CN check. So in other words, don't verify that the name is trusted, don't verify that the CA is trusted. So we're using SSL, but we're not using the trust elements that a certificate brings us, relying strictly on username password authentication. In a full production environment, what you might want to do is create a certificate based on a CA you trust, use that, so you don't actually need these options at that point. And then we're going to finally run our enter PS session. So enter PS session. The computer name is going to be the IP address of the system I'm going to connect to, and that is 54.224.183.103, 54.224.183.103, and let's just double check that. 52.224.183.103, and there we go. Fix that mistake. Session option is going to be my two options in my variable. I want to use SSL. and I want to get some credentials to run with this command. So we'll run this command. It's going to prompt me for credential. These are the username and password on my VM. And now we are PowerShell remoted into that virtual machine on Azure. See what's installed, and now we just go ahead and do any administration we could ordinarily do from PowerShell. We can also use this, by the way, in an invoke command scenario. Get that IP address again. 52. Get my username and password. And oh, I didn't specify my session options. And it should now go in and return all the features that are installed on that server. So there you have it, configuring PowerShell remoting for a VM running in Azure.